Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Musician's Mentor Podcast. I'm your host, Travis Mark, and today I have the distinct pleasure of speaking with the one and only Mr. Nick Holmsten, a music and tech visionary who is the ex-global head of music for Spotify, a best-selling author with his book Fan-Powered Futures, and the current CEO and co-founder for Belong. Nick is a really fascinating guy. We spoke a lot about how he feels the future of music is going, how artists can empower themselves by creating fan experiences, and he just cleared up a lot of misconceptions that I think a lot of artists have when it comes to digital distribution. Before I jump into my interview with Nick, please let me remind you that if you are getting anything from these interviews, to please leave us a rating, review, follow, or share across all your social and streaming platforms. It's extremely helpful. Likewise, and I know I keep saying it, but please don't forget to check out our affiliate partnership with the lovely folks over at Soundbrenner. The link is in our show notes. I'm a little under the weather today, unfortunately, so I'm going to cut this intro a little bit short. But please, enjoy my interview with the one and only Mr. Nick Holmsten. Alrighty, Nick Holmsten, welcome to the Musician's Mentor Podcast. I know we've been trying to do this for a while. I can't thank you enough for your time. And, we are here talking via the phone because as wonderful as technology is, it let us down a little bit, and I just want to have the conversation. So let's jump straight into this. I'm going to start this conversation how I start them all, and that is basically for you, Mr. Nick Holmsten, to please give a brief introduction as to who you are, what you've done, what you're currently up to, so that my listeners get an idea of where you're coming from during the course of this interview.
Well, first of all, Travis, thank you so much for having me. I'm a Swedish-born guy and now lives in New York. What took me here was actually a venture. I'm a musician from the beginning, went into songwriting, producing. When the music industry kind of collapsed, especially in the Scandinavian countries, in the mid-2000s, I get into, like a lot of other ones did, try to find a solution for it. What is the future of the music industry? And I guess, as a lot of people know, there's a reason why the Spotifys and the SoundCloud and everything was invented in Sweden. And we tried to do this, and at that time it was like beating MySpace before even Facebook stepped into that. So we were trying first with some community aspects, and I saw what Daniel and Martin at Spotify was doing. And when I got my hands on the first early kind of versions of Spotify, I realized this is going to be the future of the music industry, which in that led us to pivot and start asking the questions about like what's going to happen in the music industry when we go from like a transactional retail world into all-you-can-eat engagement model. So we actually founded a new company called Tunigo that the whole mission was really through like a playlist and editorial solve the questions, what should I listen to when all the music in the world is available? And that turned out to be a pretty good bet because we became a partner company to Spotify first. And eventually, 2013, when we got very successful, Spotify made a decision to acquire the company. I joined Spotify in 2013, then became later the global head of music when Spotify kind of took over the world. I left Spotify in 2020. Did a new venture called TSX Entertainment for 4.5 years. And since a few years back, I'm trying to solve a problem with a new company called Belong, which is really about like the relationship between artists and fans, which is my big passion and why I also wrote the book Fan-Powered Futures. There's, I think, a summary a little bit there, Travis.
Amazing. And, I always say to pretty much everybody that we're going to dissect, but there's so much to dissect here. We're going to talk about your book. We're going to talk about Spotify. We'll even talk about Belong a little bit towards the end if we have some time. I want to briefly just kind of start as far back as possible. You mentioned there, songwriting, musicianship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let's talk about your background a little bit. And then even your upbringing over there and what it was like, the music scene, et cetera, et cetera. And then I guess, even though you've summarized already, how does one, come from that musical background to then fast forward and eventually become one of the global heads of Spotify?
Yeah, I mean, like I grew up in a small town in Sweden, about a population around 50,000 people. Was like everybody else, into music early, sports, and when I was like around, I would say 15, 16 year old, I made a decision to go in and like trying to reach the dream of being an artist. And I mean, like, that's the good thing when you're young is that you're naive. You don't really understand what it means. And that was a completely different world. But we ended up in a competition that we won and were able to record at that time, which was a big thing, recording a single, in the 80s that eventually ended up, with friends that was running a record store in my hometown, and you could be able to put him on the counter. And then you tried for a lot of years, to get there. And in the end of 90, when the whole Britpop wave was happening, especially Swedish bands, this is like the Oasis era, the pulp, everything that happens like in the UK. But there was also like a subculture in Sweden with Swedish Britpop bands that kind of break through in Asia. So together with some friends, we created a band called Apple Brown Betty. Actually had like a song that was also covered in Asia and become a massive hit there that opens up for us to really get a record deal. Started to tour, never took up like in a big way, but the song really performed well. It was called Airplane. Uh, Performed better with other artists than ourselves, but that was a good thing. But that led to the songwriting things that the publisher reached out to me and say like, hey, you have written this song that really took off in a lot of regions. How about writing more? So I started to write songs, and as I said, one thing led to another. I was signed to BMG Publishing, and they introduced me to Simon Cowell. And Simon Cowell really liked what I was doing. So I started working with him and felt that that is going to be my massive break for everything. Unfortunately, the first thing he said to me that is that he and Simon Fuller is about to launch a new show called Idol.
Yeah.
That's going to change, the whole world. So it was an incredible journey to be so close to Simon when he went from like being a successful A&R with the best lives of the world to become like a global superstar. It didn't, I mean, it ended up, I wrote like a winner song to American Idol in the Netherlands and stuff like that, but I never got like the big breakthrough. But he was really like a mentor for me for a couple of years. So I learned a lot around, he always said to me, the secret of the music industry is to reach the 21-year-old nurse living in a suburb to London. If you get her, you get everyone. And that got really stuck in my head to really understand who you actually, what is your audience like? What should you be focusing on? I think sometimes we get a little bit trapped into like what's the cool shit is around our friends, but it's in the end, like if you're going to go wide, you need to get everybody on board. And then, like it took me from a small town to a bigger town in Stockholm. And then when you start to get success and when the music industry collapsed, that's where, like the interesting thing with Sweden in the middle of 2000 was that we had this early broadband penetration, a lot of engineer talent, and we had a music industry that was collapsing because of Pirate Bay, which was a Swedish company, which sounds weird, which was the reason that I think Spotify actually were able to get their test licensing. So I think everyone is doing at that time trying to look around and talk to people. And if you were into technology or product like I was, like it was someone reached out to me and one thing led to another, and suddenly you were like in the startup era and trying to solve the music industry. So yeah, I can rant for this forever, but like it's a really life is about sliding doors, and sometimes you're lucky and be at the right place and you go through that door and that opens another door. And suddenly like you join Spotify when it was a big startup. But my early days when I came to the US in like 2013, 2014, Spotify was not a big player. So when we have meetings with labels, like they felt like you're pretty cool. You're like the new kid on the block, but you're such a tiny piece of our revenue. But seeing that, from a front seat where I had, was kind of, like I said, I'm blessed with it, but it's I mean, like it's a once in a lifetime chance to sit on the front row seat and see like a whole very traditional industry totally change and transition into completely. So I'm extremely grateful for that because we all know the music industry is a very conservative industry that hasn't changed for a long time, and suddenly everything happened, and you were able to sit in the middle of it. Like, and what people always refer to me, and I think sometimes I probably way more humble about it than people say. But the fact that like Unigo was a company that created playlists. So when I say that Spotify didn't have any playlist before they acquired Unigo 2013, people don't really understand what I mean. But the whole Spotify playlist ecosystem was the Tunigo acquisition was the reason that happened. That's what we brought in. And then when Spotify playlist became, like what everybody was hunting, like it also was a big part of seeing that dramatic shift in the industry. And I had the privilege to bring in extremely talented people globally to understand music genres, whatever it was, and program for if it was like in Southeast Asia, America, South America, and building all these massive brands to today's top. It's New Music Friday, Rap Caviar, you name them. Like that is what when I'm looking back over the years I was there, like being part of something like that is incredibly, I would say like I'm incredibly grateful, but also like it's a journey with so many new friendships and so many fantastic kind of experiences that happened at that time.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing. The Spotify playlists thing, I was going to ask you about it, but you kind of went into it there anyway. It really did change the game. I mean, the fact that still now a band can almost break on a popular playlist is pretty incredible. We'll probably go a bit more into that as we go along. I've got a couple more Spotify questions since I have you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, what some people call the waterfall effect. So away from releasing singles every 4 to 6 weeks, and let's take major finance and marketing budgets out. So I'm kind of trying to make this more for independent artists, this particular question. Is there any sort of advice that artists putting music on the platform should go about to try and get noticed, or at least try and maybe get more onto those playlists? Or is it just a matter of doing the things that are already suggested? You use the canvases, you pitch for the playlist. What can artists do essentially to help themselves is what I'm basically trying to ask.
Yeah, and as you understand, I get this question a lot. And I think there's a couple of things which I think is important to understand. And I think everybody understands the enormous amount of new music that's being uploaded every day to Spotify. And that is, of course, on a level now that it's no one can, as a human in any way address all that music. So what we did from the beginning, and I think works very similar today, was really trying to understand like what are the tools we can give editors, and how can algorithm, machine learning, and AI help us to really find like these nice nuggets of music. And because in the early days we had a mission when we started to build a playlist system and we started to like move more into automatic systems, is that first of all, like the way Spotify works is extremely data driven, has always been, always going to be. So the system that knows if some happens out of the platforms, like how do we get the information and making sure that we can take these new songs and put them in front of a potential new audience, and after that, make the song automatically grow in the system. That is the number one thing to understand, that there is no, like, you pitch a song in and you just, pray that it's going to end up in a playlist. I think what's fantastic with Spotify is that they have the tentacles out there. They know what's going on outside. So I usually say to people, you have to rethink and go back in the old days, because now Spotify is such a massive machinery, and they're going to work in your favor if you understand how this works. So my recommendation is always like, it's not like not everyone that releases music can say like, I'm gonna make my living on that. That is not a right, like it's a meritocracy. And first of all, like you need to go in some way through that checkpoint. Are you talented enough? So I refer to people and new artists that become successful is that you need to focus on the fans and not on the platform. And what I mean with that is that there is no kind of magical situations that everybody hoping for. Imagine they put this song on a playlist and then it just explodes. That's like the dream scenario. I think the same thing why people go to Hollywood and they believe that someone's going to find them and they're going to be like these big new actors. The way I always, and when I'm looking at artists and following artists that are successful, they really embrace what I say. Like, if you focus on the fans, so the way it is, like, you need to make sure that you have what takes it. So if you can have like 10 people love you, you can get 100 people to love you. If you can get 100 people love you, you can get 1,000 people to love you, and so on and so on. So where do you start? So I'm at an artist that's been extremely successful. And I think the most important thing for artists today is really about being authentic and really be your true self and build friendship with your fans. You can look at the big artists like the Taylors of the world. So ones have been able to go from being superstar, meaning broadcast model to fans, to engagement models with fans. The people that has been able to transition into that friends environment, they are the ones who sell in. They are the ones who are successful today. The same thing applies for new artists. So one example is like, start where you can. Offer your fans when you start building them, like say, hey, I'm gonna come home and play in your backyard for your friends, and you build from that. There's no other way today to find out if you have what you take it and build your fan base that eventually will pay off is to start from the bottom. There's no shortcut. People are just not ready to do that work. But the people that do that work and build a fan base explodes. We talk about an artist today, like when I talked to one of my friends who is a big managers, and he was explaining for me about this artist, Alex Warren, that's now exploding a little bit. He did the same thing. He started on YouTube, building friends, all the different things. He did it exactly. I think he can be a really great blueprint for how you break in without the label and how you do. But it takes works. You have to build your fandom. So I think when everybody's saying like, do you have a trick to get on the Spotify plays? You're asking the wrong question.
Yeah.
That is the problem. That is not the question you should be asking. All these things going to happen. But think about it when we were young in the old days when there were record store. There's a reason why you end up on that, like top list wall is because you're successful and people pick it up. But every story has a moment where you're taking these steps. So I'm going to stop there, but that is my biggest belief, and that's why I have spent so much time thinking about it and looking at data points and find these examples and see that this is really, truly how it works. You have to think about it.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and that's a good segue into your book, Fan Powered Futures. I haven't yet read the book. I did ask Yana to forward me a download, but I haven't got it yet, but I'm sure she will. I did read a few of the synopses and a few reviews and stuff, so I think I have a good idea as to what the book may be about. However, tell the listeners what the book covers and what your goal was putting the book together.
Yeah, I think from a macro level, I'm a very macro-driven person, and the music industry that has this dramatic change that we also happen with streaming, which also was at the same time suddenly people could start producing music in their bedroom. The cost of producing music went down. The gatekeeper disappeared. Anyone can get their music on the platform, and then I think the most important thing is that what have happened in the last 5 years is that the power is shifting towards the artist. But the artists, like the new marketeers of the world, since traditional media, broadcast media, moved over to social media, becomes your fans. And it doesn't matter if when I grew up, like the fandom in Apple, you can see a similar way in Tesla, even if we don't go into what's going on there. But you know what I'm saying? Like fashion brands, if it's Gucci, if it's Louis Vuitton, like they're building the same fandom that is the foundation of artists. And what I realized that the only marketeers you have is actually your fans. So when I started to write the book, it was really to explain that dramatic shift that happens and how to navigate that new world. Because what happens on the back end of that is that now the biggest artists in the world, they basically own the rights. They control the rights, and they might license it now to the major labels on a completely different kind of revenue split model, where they used to maybe get, if you were lucky, 20%, but their label took 80. It's the other way around now. The responsibility ended up even on the biggest artist is really the marketing piece. They cannot look at the labels to do that anymore because they control the product. So what I say is that if we have seen the shift happen in social media in general, you have influencers getting paid, you have like communities of smaller influencers that you can network, that you can use. And then you have all these artist fans that are the ones who drive and amplify the message. They start to come to a point where they realize, like, okay, we talking about these artists, we promote them, we share them, we do all these different things. But every time there's a concert in town, we can't get our hands on tickets, and we end up buying $2,000 nosebleed tickets, on secondary scalpers,
Yeah.
and that is the whole problem. So what I'm trying to say is it's time for the artists to start give back, and that is why I believe that fans' power is bigger. They are a little bit like they hire you, but they fire you. So the artists that to lean in to that machinery and understands that the fans is extension of their brands, they are the ones who you see become extremely successful. And the next step I predict in the book is that they need to start giving back to the fans. And the fans is looking for recognitions, reward, access to the things that they promote. They don't want to see the rich people, and the artists don't want to see the rich people sitting there, on the first row, buying that expense tickets to impress on whoever it is that they brought there. The fans should be there. They should be rewarded for that. So I think what I try to spark with the book is saying, like, we went from a broadcast model where we used traditional media to market things to consumers. And at that time, it was like mostly a discussion about like quality and price. We went to like a completely new world where kids growing up, and it's more about access, exclusivity, and recognition, and all these different things. And some artists have leaned into that and became extremely successful. And so for me, fandom is the future of marketing, but it's also the future of success of any products in pop culture. So the book is trying to frame these macro moments, what you can do around these different things. And I wanted to embed it because I went through a couple of really interesting journeys, both with, the Spotify journey, but also TSX, how we kind of, open up this crazy stage in the middle of Times Square on a billboard, and brought the Post Malone, Shakira, and BTS, Jungkook there, and just had 40, 50,000 people, and created numbers that no one had seen about amplification. Because what I learned about this is that, like, if you're going to have a really huge effect on social media, it doesn't work to just sharing things that people already know about or nothing special. People want to share moments where they feel like they experience something that no one else. They want to have the surprise mechanism on it. So it's almost like, oh my God, I can't believe I experienced this. Look, and you want to share it. So what we did with TSX was really to create this surprise, like fans got freaked out. So I think the book is trying to like tell some really interesting stories that very few have heard, like what happens behind the scenes of these big releases, and also what we did on TSX, and also try to give some advice, moving forward, how you can use some of these learnings, and take the learnings and try to, adopt them into what you're after doing. And it's going to be helpful in some ways, and you can draw some conclusions that you say, like, that was smart. I think that can move from this. That is really the essence of the book.
Cool. So let me ask you, do you think that with the invent of social media and how powerful it has become for artists, provided someone has a decent internet connection and a way to create content, is location as important for musicians as what it used to be?
I don't think so. I don't think it's at all. If you mean with locations, like where you live, all the traditional things, is that what you're
Yeah.
thinking about? Like where you're coming from? Yeah. No, I think we are, and we saw it very well. I mean, I can tell a couple of other insights that people might not know how it actually came together. So Spotify was a big enabler of starting collabs and have what we call like is a little bit like in every country you have a lot of people diasporas from a certain kind of like so in the US you have a huge diaspora of Latin Americans, Spanish speaking people, and there have been once in a while that kind of breakthrough when Spotify opens up and we ended up in this kind of global environment where your streams, no matter where they came from, really impacted your success globally. We started to say like there needs to be way more collaborations between, the Latin artists and the US artists because, and I had this conversation with Scooter Brown for a long time, like in his early days, when Justin did Despacito and stuff like that. If you starting to think about like the world as a global world and thinking about the power of taking one fan group and attaching another fan group for them, you actually going to be 1+1+3. So Spotify was a really like an enabler to encourage managers, record labels to start creating these over the border collaborations, which opens up for the K-pop eventually and so on and so on. And I think that is the biggest shift today. It's interesting to see how people like, singing Spanish songs, like, but they not speak Spanish and seeing how like music can transfer over borders. And that is definitely like, to your point, I think it can be anywhere. I don't think it has like in the old days where you needed to be LA or whatever you want to be cool or getting into the club. It's not like that anymore. You can be wherever you want. And I think the more you collaborate over borders, the better it's going to be for you.
Nice. Yeah, good answer. What are some attributes or characteristics away from the obvious, being music skills, that you feel up and coming artists or musicians should try and educate themselves on to try and once they are creating content and trying to create fans and get their music out there, that they can have a little bit more control over their careers?
Yeah, I think the number one advice, which I think is extremely important. I mean, like I grew up where you basically dressed you up as a rock star. You're trying to be someone because someone has projected an image on you. Like you have to look at it a certain way. And the record label, especially like in the back in the days, I think it's escalators in the 90s and 2000 was really like if if the industry was looking for a young girl who was dancing and singing pop, everybody's tried to do this copycat and release them, and then change the boy band, and then change the girl band, and then whatever it was. It was always like the taste of today's taste, and this is what we're running for. The big, I think, shift was when we started to see the artists like the Ed Sheerans, the Billie Eilish. Suddenly, artists came in, was not like cut out uh, superstars. They had a different message. They showed their vulnerability. They talked about things that no one else. They didn't have the rock star look, so to speak. That was the opening when all the floodgates opened for me. And that's also where fans started to realize, oh, now we went from like being fans to that artist to really being fans to that artist. And I think that's a very, very important distinction. So if you think about an artist like Taylor, it is interesting. I read an article in New York Times where they say like probably they say like 60% of the people that comes to Taylor Swift are probably very lonely people, and they have found this new community as a replacement for the tradition of friendship, because most times they're alone and watching the screens. And when we did a lot of research, we find out that it was exactly that thing that happens. Like people believe it's not just the fact it's Taylor, it's almost an excuse. And I know that Chris Martin in Coldplay said the same thing. Like, why do you think you're selling so many tickets to your shows? And he said, like, I think it's just a great excuse for people to get together. And I think there's so much more true in that than we realize. So I would say, like, the fact of the relationship between an artist and fans have shifted so dramatic. So for anyone that grows up right now, you need to be authentic. It is about storytelling. It's about building bonds with your fans. Like, it's just a completely different world today when it comes to that thing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. I'm kind of thinking of a few things to ask you as we're talking, even though I've got my list of questions here. I wanted to just ask you two more kind of, well, the one's kind of content relation sort of driven, and the other one's back to Spotify driven. But in relation to almost like my location question, do you think age still plays a part with artists breaking now? You know, I mean, I remember when I was growing up, especially with music, a lot of guys had this attitude that if you hadn't made it by like 24, 25, you were over the hill. Yet I see a lot of people on TikTok, and I say a lot like I'm on it all the time. I shouldn't have said it quite like that, but I've seen some people on TikTok that are definitely not the demographic that you get told are the age to be famous, and they seem to be blowing up. Now, again, it could be smoke and mirrors. I don't know exactly what's true and not true with that sort of stuff, but what are your thoughts on that? Do you think age is as important as it used to be?
Definitely not as important as it used to be. So I do believe like anyone can make it today. I do believe it's going to be better for you, easier if you're, because especially like the whole kind of TikTok history of creating pieces of content and getting attention and kind of do it like more and more extreme is, of course, like there is like a Gen Z kind of foundation there. But I would say like, I don't think people think about it. I have kids that are now in Gen Z, but they are past 20, like, and I see they kind of now find a lot of the music that I'm listening to because they might find it through Stranger Things, or if it's like it's a TikTok video with something that happens, like the Cranberry guy who was on the skateboard, listening to Fleetwood Mac, like, and suddenly that just opens up. I think there's two things to think about. Like, there's one thing that has to do with the music, like, and the consumption of music and really loving that, which I think is ageless. When it comes to identifying a friendship and build closer bonds with them, there it might be you want to be equal in some way. So maybe it's more difficult, like, to reach a young generation, like with that kind of relationship, but it doesn't mean they're not going to listen to your music. I hope that makes sense, because I think it's two different things when you navigate that.
Yeah.
But to answer your question is like, it used to be if you passed a certain age, like you could not even door and never. It's definitely not like this before. Like, and I think there's also, you can be very mystic about it. You can be an alias. You don't have to show your face. I mean, like, there's so many different ways that you can do things today that it's not in any way kind of age related. So it's definitely a completely different world today than it used to be.
Yeah, I agree. Last sort of Spotify related kind of question here, Nick. Back to numbers and playlists and a lot of booking agents and managers and stuff now for artists that are trying to go up a level, they look at numbers, and they have forever. It's always been about how many Facebook page people you had or Instagram followers, etc., etc., etc. I get it. It's a business. It needs to be looked at like a business. Now, I've seen over the last few years, a lot of people are trying these, like, I'm going to call them playlist curators. For purpose of example, there's one called Groover. I've heard of another one called Muso Soup. I forget the name of some of the others. And these guys, you sign up to their platforms, you pitch your song, they pitch it to all of their curators, and their curators all apparently have Spotify playlists or review music or host blogs, etc., etc., etc. Recently, I was working with an artist who used some of these platforms, and again, I don't know all the ins and outs of the data behind it, but his song actually got removed from Spotify after receiving a thing saying, hey, we have reason to suspect that your numbers might be fraudulent. And what was interesting was, we had quite a lengthy discussion, and the only platforms he had used to try and get his song out there, inverted commas, was these supposedly legitimate companies like these Groovers and these Muso Soups. So now I don't expect you to know anything about those per se, but what are the general thoughts within the Spotify camp about using those kind of potential curators to try and get your song out there more? Is it frowned upon or is it encouraged?
Yeah, I mean, like it's all these platforms that nicely, in some ways, kind of promote themselves as pitching to curators or pay-to-play is paywall platforms. That's how they work. That's how they operate. That's the business model of them. Spotify can so easily understand this system, and I gotta tell you, like when people ask me about it, I don't know enough about them. I know some of them, but I can tell you how it works. If there's any way, I mean, like that, you're basically paying for streams. A lot of these platforms, first of all, like they have very, very little power of actually moving the needle. So it's going to be artificially made. And what I mean with that is that there's a huge kind of bot structure on Spotify, and really like bot farms with phones on premium subscriptions. It's the same way as you inflate your Instagram likes or comments, whatever. It's the same system. There's a lot of companies that do this. I actually have visited some of them, and it's fucking scary to see, 600,000 mobile phones on the wall. Like this is how sophisticated this is. Yeah. But Spotify is a pretty smart company, so they can see your clusters, where they're coming from, like a lot of that. So they know, and when they do these things and see it, and it's when you look at the Spotify backend, it's so easy to see that you have done it. So they can more judge it from like, this is an artificial uptick. It's not an organic. We don't see this happening in a pattern that it should happen. We see that these are certain spikes at certain places that happens, and we have seen that patterns and remove things before. If you get qualified for trying to leverage the system, even if your intention might be like, hey, this is incredible, I'm paying for someone to help me pitch to the playlist creator at Spotify. That is not really what happens. These are not playlist curator by say. This is playlists with a lot of followers that these companies has acquired. They have compiled a lot of these playlists, and they have created automation of driving streams on them. Spotify see that. So my recommendation to anyone out there is like, this is not a good path. This could really be destroying you. And you also need to know another thing that happens. And that is, a lot of money laundering happens on this, because think about it without going into detail, just going to play scenario. This is mostly around artists that might coming from South Americans, tell-like worlds. So think about it like this. If you have a premium subscription, and the way Spotify works, if people don't understand the model, it's basically like all the streams that generates, is basically divided based on the pool of money that coming from premium advertising and stuff like that, and share true data to the streams. That means that, number one, you need to have very young listeners on your music, because they are playing much, much more music than the older demos. And that is the reason why you see that maybe like an artist, Pink Floyd, is not racking up the same numbers as a Taylor Swift doing, because the consumers of the artist is so much more engaged and maybe playing 5 times as much music at it. And this is a mathematic game. So that's the number one to think about. So what they do, a lot of these, when they want to money laundering, is basically if you can keep up the plays of music on a level that is as high as these Gen Z people, and you play your own content, out from premium accounts, it means basically like if you control publishing rights and master rights, you basically get back 70%, because that's what Spotify is doing. People, I want to emphasize, because I think Spotify is getting hit so much about, people don't really understand. 70% of all the money that Spotify brings in goes back to whoever owns the master and the publishing. So if the artists are giving away, 95% of their revenues to the master, to the record labels, of course, they're only going to get 5% of it, but the record label is going to be very, very wealthy. But if you own your rights, it's a lot of money. So what have happened in money laundering and what triggers us even more in this system is that people intentionally buying specific catalogs and then just extremely playing them, out of premium account. And they are happy that they can launder $100 to $70, that is something also that is happening a lot, maybe not on a level, but that's also like a big problem because I talk to a lot of people in the major record labels. And they say that this is what's going on every week on the charts on Spotify, that people, even the biggest artists in the world, starting to inflate their numbers. So it's a very, very tricky navigation for everyone to go. Should I get in there when everybody's? It's starting to become very similar to like the old paywall model that was for radio, but just in a different way.
Yeah.
Because the music industry has always worked like that. And you know that. It's if people find a way how you can shortcut. If you're an independent artist or established artist, people kind of do it. But the difference now is that there's always, every time when they launched the Billboard 100 this week, everyone's trying to come up with a way how to sell more record, bundle with shit and do whatever. And it's always going to be a lot of conversations before the final list comes out. This is the music industry. I kind of brought it up, but I think it's important to understand that like there's no shortcuts. And my absolute number one recommendation to any emerging new artist, don't do it. Because once you're flagged, it's going to take a long time for you to get back.
Interesting. Good to know. Thank you. All right, let's shift gears. You mentioned Belong. Tell me what you guys do. What do you do that might help artists? And how can aspiring artists potentially, get to work with you guys?
I think like the whole mission, around Belong, and it's still a lot of confidentially. It was a big article in Music Business Worldwide after the announcement yesterday, but we have been very cryptic about it. We have just said that like we want to give back the power to the fans, and the reward and the recognition. And the way we do it is very different. So we are the first one that really focusing on building a fan-first platform instead of doing the traditional way that you build a platform for artists and have them come in and trying to, drive fans over to them. So our overall mission is really, really trying to create that movement to shift. And that is going to help artists a lot because I can't go into all the details, but there's a fintech element to it. So it's a kind of banking service, which means that the people that are on the Belong platforms are what we call went through a KYC, know your customers. They are not bots, they are real people, which means that they get verified in a complete different ways. And there's a transaction element to it. And that is a very sophisticated and multi-layer kind of thinking about it. But what we're hoping to do is really to create a platform where artists can work directly with fans and reward them in a way that helps both sides, without all these middlemen and people, in different way making money in between. That is a long-term kind of strategy on it. And we do it in a very different way, and we have combined with fintech. And I can't tell you all about it right now. I recommend to maybe check it out and draw your own conclusion on it because it's coming out pretty quickly. And I think it will be something that people will say like, wow, I wish this would have been earlier. I know that fans going to love it. I know that artists going to love it. It just opens up for so much opportunities to solve a problem that I think is broken, the direct relationship between artists and fans, which now happens, as you know, on other platforms where the artists don't control the content and more than the platforms. And that's what we're trying to do to create a better relationship by incentives from both sides.
Great. Yeah. I'll put the link in the show notes for people who want to check that out, but it sounds fascinating. What are your general opinions or potential insights on AI and its effects or potential effects on music and the music industry in general?
That's a big thing. For me, as it is right now, I think AI gives you superpowers. So the way I think about it, if you're creative, it gives you resources that you didn't have before. Like you are able to do things that you couldn't do before. You don't need to hire all these people. They can give you a lot of help in so many different ways. Uh, I usually talk a lot about the different levels of AI in music. I'm not 100% convinced that today, but I will never say never that like AI will replace the creation process and became an artificial artist and stuff like that. There will be examples of that, but it will definitely not be. I think there's so many other senses and relationship between artists and fans that it's very difficult to really create with AI. But I would say like what I like about it, and when people say to me like, what is the best way to use AI? I would say like one thing to think about is if a song, for example, on a platform like Spotify, is starting to break through, like and really happening. I think what AI can do, which was way more tricky for like create 50 alternative version of these songs that fits to all the different kind of moods and like moments that you can imagine and release them when a song is like this is something that where I think you can expand on your reach with music if you control all these different things to cost instead of you doing like a dance remix, if you know what I mean. Like you do the ripped off unplugged, you do the country version, you do like the Sunday Shield, whatever the AI come up, and of course you're going to be the judge if you think these are good. And the other thing is that I think is going to be extremely easy for people to express themselves for music videos, for content creation, whatever you need to be able to promote you for a fraction of the cost what they used to be. So I just think it's for me, I follow it. We're using a lot of it when we're building right now. I see it primarily as a superpower that creators can take a lot of advantage on it. It might turn into something completely different later on and getting smarter and becoming, like an artificial artist, maybe. I think it's a few years from now until we actually know if that's going to happen. But I think embracing it, in a creative way, just to making sure that you can work as you had like a 10 people team around you is really the incredible value you get from AI today.
I have to agree. Taking all variables and change into account, and this is potentially a difficult question, but what should artists potentially do to try and innovate or survive, especially if they're not very technologically driven?
Yeah, I think performing is at least the starting points. I encourage everyone, like if you want to reach people, the absolute easiest way to reach people is to play in front of them. And that means everywhere in front of them. I think that is where it starts. And if you're shy and you don't want to play, like in a subway station or, like whatever you do, like, yeah, it could be a limitation for you. But if you don't have any problems to really perform, I should be looking for opportunities to perform, because that is guarantee at least that you are able to showcase who you are and play music for fans while they're listening. And I'm going to tell you, if you deliver something they're going to like, they're going to come up to you and they're going to ask where to find, like information and be ready for it. And that's how you start building your fan base. So the absolute number one easiest way to get your fan base going is perform. Offer to perform. Like I know people, like that did nothing else and just went out and play outside colleges and whatever it is just to get move the needle, creating content, sharing that, and slowly seeing how they kind of gaining more and more people.
Yeah.
Because the beauty about fans is that they want to be first. Like that is a very big driver for them. So if you get these ambassadors, they're going to take credit for helping you, which, like it's why they are super fans. So yeah, get out there, play as much as you can. That is the absolute number one advice I will give to anyone in this industry.
I like it. Nick, last question for you, dude.
Mhm.
What do you think has either been the best piece of advice you've ever received in regards to, well, usually I ask people in regards to a music career. You're still within the music industry. So
Mhm.
either that or something you've learnt along the way that might serve as good advice for up-and-coming musicians.
Yeah, I would say like it's going to start. I mean, this is an industry where you really have to have some kind of trusted circle of people. So number one, find people that you can trust with your life, that want to work with you, that are the people that are the most important for you in the future. So number one is get a team around you. Uh, and the second thing is like, don't ever care what people say to you. Because if you have created a team that believes in your vision, we're living in a world where it's so much easier to say no than yes. And not even your friends is going to tell you the truth. Like, so you have to believe. You're basically your CEO of your own career. Like, you are the captain of the ship. Like, and what I have learned, and I can talk from experience, was a lot of years I doubted myself. I believe I didn't have what it takes, like, because everyone is really quick to tell you this, and you get the information from everyone else that you're not good enough, and it's so difficult and stuff like that. I don't care what people think. I wish I can say to everyone, like, don't care what people say. Find a close circle of people you trust. These are the ones you should listen to. You should never listen to anyone else because no one knows more than you.
I love it, man. I love it. All right. Amazing. Dude, that was very insightful. I can't thank you enough for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Nick Holmsten. I can't thank you enough, dude. I wish you the best of luck for everything. And if you ever come down to New Orleans, hit me up, man.
I will, Travis. And thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Peace. Okay. There we have it, everybody. Nick Holmsten. I'd like to publicly thank Nick for his time. As usual, I'd like to publicly thank each and every one of you for your time. Thank you for continuing on this journey with me. I know I say it every episode, but if you need some help or guidance with your band or your artist career, please drop me a DM. I'm always happy to talk and help. Keep pushing, keep making great music, keep following your dreams. I believe in you. You should believe in you too. Until the next time, peace.